Greetings, 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 as I said a moment ago when I was muted. Hope everyone is doing good. And the talk title is, what was the talk title?
How belief works.
How belief works. I'm going to talk about that a couple of different directions. One is just, well, you've heard me say, probably don't believe it, don't disbelieve it, don't ignore it. Not an easy dynamic to just accomplish and just do, and never be at the mercy of those kinds of disturbances again. So the situational belief and just kind of temporary comings and goings of belief work quite well. Kind of need to have a little bit of belief that something makes a noise and you hear something down through the woods, as happened hundreds of years ago. Probably had to go into some kind of a belief about it. I believe that's a polar bear or something. So a little bit of that is happening in order to protect us. So we need to have a little bit of extended interest in terms of believing that something's happening or something else is not happening, or believing that we have enough food to last us, and all of those things. What happens is, out of the self-centeredness, the polarity of me and you guys, or me and the rest of the world, me and what I want, me and what I can't quite get to, me and what people keep taking away from me or I keep losing. Excuse me. And then we come up with some kind of a belief about how we can work with that, or what is true, what's untrue. The upside of belief is kind of obvious. If we believe something, then we can operate out of that until we see, we don't have to believe it. It's just the case. It's just what do we call that? A fact. But we tend to, quite often out of fear, we tend to find something that we can believe in, and we can, and that relieves us of doing any kind of investigation in that area, because we believe it, so we don't have to look at that anymore. And then we can actually address what we believe, and it gives us a temporary feeling of security. We believe in this. Sometimes people will ask me, probably have asked some of you, well, you're a Buddhist. What do Buddhists believe? And I say quite often, and not trying to be well, maybe a little bit silly, is I say not much. And that's because, not that some Buddhist organizations or religious orders and so on don't have kinds of beliefs or things that they look at that they feel are true and other things are untrue. But I don't know if you can actually go back and find out where the Buddha particularly believed things or preached some kind of belief in something. And as the story goes, perhaps you've heard when he was asked, who created all this? Is there a deity? Is there a creator? As the story I heard, you might have heard another one, is that he remained silent. Quite often he remained silent when he knew that, my speculation, I have no idea, but probably that would be the best position to take on it, like not much of a position. So when I say don't believe, don't disbelieve, don't look away, I'm saying insofar as you can, don't take a position on anything, unless you have to. You might situationally, have to show up as some kind of a situation where you're believing in something. But less seems to be better. And that way, whatever is roiling around in the background 3 days from now, or in the other room, or in your backyard, or in your family situation, or in your health situation, the more you can just keep, shall we call it this, just an open dimension. I'm not going to clamp down on it. I'm not going to get rid of it, and I'm not going to ignore it. I'm just going to observe that, just like the instruction, the way I teach it is to train your mind to see clearly. Sit down, look at something where not much is happening, called a wall, and watch what moves in the mind stream. And this way, you kind of get to know how your mind is working personally, rather than somebody else's idea, your culture's idea, your family's idea, your mom, your dad, your partner's idea about who you are. And don't get your identity from somebody else. You might want to just look at the fundamental nature of identity itself. Is there a an identity? And if so, how is it substantiated? How is it supported? How is it perpetuated? How does that work? Look closely. So belief or thinking that something is true without really being sure about it, or else not really being sure about it, but feeling like I have to believe in that. I don't know about the rest of you, but I remember when I was very young, holding up a Bible and looking at it and thinking, what does this mean? What is this? My grandmother was happy to tell me it's the Word of God. And was I going to disagree with my grandmother? I do remember asking her one time, because I was real curious about people wanting to go to heaven. I remember asking her, I might have told some of you this story before. So I was trying to get some kind of idea of what heaven might be like. And I understood from her that you could kind of have anything you wanted there. I said, can you have all the sugar you want? I was like 7 or 6. So yes, I remember asking her that, but also knowing myself at the time, I didn't care about sweet stuff at all when I was young. I do now. So in case you want to send me a banana cream pie, I'd be happy to receive that. Chuckling over there. So I was trying to get some kind of idea of what is this true? What is this about? And I had quite a bit of for a small person, although a lot of very, very young people, you'll notice when they ask you questions, they're coming out of a kind of maturity that is natural, that is not locked up by some kind of right and wrong, up and down, back and forth, belief and disbelief. They really want to know what this is. But the culture, sometimes the parents shut people down, starting with, when I say people, I mean, in case you didn't know, 7-year-olds are people. And quite often they're not really respected. They are taught to believe things because it's just easier. If they believe something, then a problem solved. Sometimes even in a conversation, we'll be talking back and forth about something that's a little vague, and somebody's, well, do you believe that? And then you might say, I don't really believe that. Or, yeah, I think that's probably, there's speculation is going on. You don't need to do that. You can actually just not have any idea what's happening, even though there are people around you that want to encourage you to join in, to be part of their crew. All of that being said, if something starts to arise in your mind stream, the other part of the way I want to talk about this is we don't want to believe that if it's something really difficult or something challenging, like some kind of intense anxiety that comes up for some of us with no apparent source for it. And what do I say? Don't believe, don't disbelieve, but for heaven's sake, don't look away from it. Don't distract yourself from it if you can help it by going into something else or speculation. Don't do speculation. You could actually receive that. You're a human being. You could actually receive whatever shows up in your mind stream and in your life stream without objecting, agreeing, or shutting down. Those are the 3 ways that they're called the 3 poisons. That's the way we condition ourselves to believe there's somebody who's getting ahead, somebody who's going to fail or get behind, and same thing with something else, some other person. It's interesting when you do that belief situation over and over, you kind of condition yourself to just stop looking in that direction. So what happens eventually is you think you are somebody. And I'm not saying there isn't something happening there, but it is not a separate being. Look closely. And if you look closely, you won't necessarily conclude that you're not a separate being. Any kind of conclusion is a misunderstanding of what this actually is. And as you heard me say before, don't believe a word I say. And I'm not saying that just a joke. I'm saying you find out. It may be the path of meditation. It may be Buddhism. It may be Islam. maybe nothing at all. You may have to go and study under someone in India, study some, or not, maybe not at all. Maybe just disregard that and just work on your life as a mundane path of just getting ahead and accomplishing, getting your degree and being an archaeologist and going on digs and digging in the dirt all the time. Not bad therapy. Digging. Anybody digging the dirt here? Yeah. I see one dirt digger over there. A good friend of mine, I was in the fourth grade. I met him in the fourth grade. He taught me how to smoke cigarettes, how to dip peanut butter sandwiches in coffee cream with a lot of sugar. His name was Larry. He's not watching. He has had no interest in this at all. I don't even know if he knows I do this. And but he just called me recently to scold me because he figured I was one of those closed-minded people who wouldn't get a vaccination. I said, no, I'm getting one. He said, I just want to make sure you were going to get one because there's so many people that just aren't going to do that. So anyway, I won't go on too much about Larry other than to say, what else could I say about Larry? Oh, dirt digger. That's where it came from. Larry was quite a kind of a, some kind of a psychotic. No, not psychotic. He was some kind of he had a lot of insight into a lot of stuff. He actually read when I recommended it to him in 1974, maybe, or 5. He saw that I was studying Buddhism and meditation. He said, what are you doing that for? I said, it's interesting to me. He said, why? And I said, it's interesting. I said, you want to read this? And no, I don't want to read that. I said, I'll tell you what, read this. And then I want to ask you questions about it. The challenge he liked. I said, I'll do that. And it was amazing to actually ask him about the 3 marks of, the 3 lords of materialism, and see that he had read that and understood what was said and was able to tell me what that was. It was quite astonishing. So I have no idea what that's about, but that's not an easy set of concepts to just read and be able to answer questions about. And he also has a couple of other areas that we touched on, the nature of ego and all that. So what I was getting to and what triggered the whole digging in the dirt idea is Larry said, being philosophical on occasion, he said, everything's a dirt digger. I said, what? He said, there isn't anything that isn't a dirt digger. This is his way of saying, I don't know, we're all one or something. I don't know. But it's just kind of a homely approach to it that, and I think he's 2 weeks older than I am. So he's going to turn 80 here pretty quick too. And actually, I can't remember, don't have memorized what he said, but he was able to actually, anything you mentioned, he would tell you the way in which that was digging dirt in some way. It was doing something with relative stuff. I can't remember any of them, but yeah, he had me buffaloed. Still does. So what do I do when I talk to Larry? I listen. He has no idea who I am or what I'm doing, other than his projections onto me, which are quite intense. You met Larry.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Met Larry.
What was the name of the book?
Huh?
What was the name of the book he read and told you about?
Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. You know, it was pretty astonishing. I'm not saying he had the whole book memorized. It wasn't, but it was interesting that he could answer questions about it and didn't have any questions. Yeah, I understand that. It's interesting. That's all I would say about it. So belief, if you can somehow see, the way you do this is not to stop believing, not to stop disbelieving, and not to ignore, but rather through the sitting practice of meditation, through what we're all endeavoring to do, sit down and hold still, train the mind so that you can see the way in which you shut down, the way in which you believe or assume, have certain assumptions about things. And it can be, they can be assumptions that you don't know about, but you're operating out of them, but you don't know you have them. You don't, if you actually have prejudice, you're not going to know about that, because the very nature of prejudice is to ignore or not to know. So if you begin to see that you have ideas about something that may not be exactly what is happening, then it isn't a full-blown prejudice that a lot of society is dealing with when it comes to whatever, black and brown people, for one, the obvious one. Or it can go the other direction on to old white people, old white men. Yeah, I'm one of those. So it is about seeing the grasping, the belief, or the rejecting, the disbelief, or the closing off, the very literal shutting down, or possibly the other one that is more difficult to see is the just distracting yourself into something else. And that distraction into something else can be Prozac. I mean, it can be a highly stylized prescription to get you to stop looking at the very stuff that, if I'm talking to you, I might say, I won't always say, I'm not going to step into the medical profession, but I might say you might want to just consider not doing anything about it other than watching what it does, how it moves. What is it? What fundamentally is it? There isn't anything, and this isn't condemning you to anything, but there isn't anything that isn't arising in your mind stream, in your life stream, in the world. I don't care how horrible, that isn't dependently arisen. So to begin to go in and try to dismantle, use some kind of manipulative situation to fix something and make it work right is just buying into the whole charade. It's just you're all you're doing is moving from the tilt-a-whirl over to the haunted house, and from the haunted house over to the merry-go-round, or the even more difficult circular thing is the Ferris wheel. I mean, you know what it's like to be at the top of the Ferris wheel. I don't see any expressions of recognition. You know, it goes around. Yeah, okay. So it's about awareness. It's about really vividly seeing what is occurring with no interference. Don't accept it. Don't reject it. Don't shut down. Don't look away. And that can take a long time to train the mind so that it is not continually being sucked into some kind of vortex of desire or some vortex of fear. And how is that done? You have to witness being sucked into it. You have to actually see what happens with no agenda. It's almost like, it's exactly like, no, it's almost like, it's kind of like, give a damn what happens, but not exactly. It's kind of like your curiosity, your interest in what is happening has somehow gone beyond the boundaries of, will this hurt me? Or is this good? Is this bad? Should I be doing this? Who should I check with? Maybe I should ask somebody. It might be really good to have a transcendental kind of curiosity where you want to know what this is. And you're not going to settle for my response or my explanation or anybody's. As it says in the Zen tradition, don't put the Buddha on top of your own head. You're not separate from the Buddha, but you might need a teaching person to point that out to you. And the Sangha to make damn sure you don't forget it. And a teaching to give you something to do in your spare time. We have a lot of spare time, so we study a lot. I can continue to talk about this, or I can respond to questions. Sometimes questions are helpful. Do you have any?
When you're bowing. So we've been watching the impeachment trial, and it seems like there's intense belief going on there in order to make a case.
Yeah.
So how do we observe, not get caught up in?
Just see that you get caught up. Pardon me for interrupting you, but that shows up immediately. We just watched today for a while. It's very, very difficult. It's heartbreaking to see people so caught up in their this contagious area of wanting to have control, of wanting to be right, wanting to get reelected, however you want to say it. And it can't be, you can't just go in and fix it or correct it. It just doesn't work that way. And when I say it doesn't work that way, it might. I'm not particularly correct, but less is better. This doesn't mean you shouldn't do whatever, vote, or maybe you should march on Washington. I don't think so, but I don't know what kind of karma you're dealing with. More?
When you're behind, especially when there's a lot of emotion involved,
Yeah.
it just seems really difficult to not
Yeah.
see what's being believed.
Yeah.
So is there some way to intercept that belief?
I don't know if I would call it intercept, but just the situation is we just need to see what's coming and going without any kind of post-it notes or addendum on that, and have a willingness to not really know what that is, even though everyone around you is screaming at you what that is, plus or minus, up or down, back and forth, correct or incorrect, excuse me, legal, illegal, and just all of the other things that attorneys do. I'm not against that. I'm not against any of that. I'm not against the Constitution or any of that. I'm just saying that as an awareness practice, as much as you can, observe what's happening without particularly jumping into some dynamic. That's very difficult to do, because sometimes the people that you know really well think that. I'm sure you've noticed, especially these days, when you find that your own children have political views that are strange, and yet you know they're intelligent. I mean, they're your children. So, but you cannot see, and I'm not condemning you to anything, and I'm not trying to define what your awareness, your intelligence, your insight can do, but seeing the source of dependent origination is a part, not as possible as we think it is. The source of that is extremely stretched out and diverse. One of the ways is a metaphor that I use sometimes. I think it's in, was it tributary streams flow through the darkness? Which one is that? One of you people with a good memory as it's young. Huh?
Sound okay?
Does that sound okay? If I get 3 people shaking their head, yeah, I'll put it. Oh, I'm believing you. Notice? See, now I don't know that, but here I am, situationally believing you, but I'm going to go look it up as soon as I get out of here. See if you lied. So tributary streams flow through the darkness. So that means that whatever is showing up as this apparent situation, the source of that is fundamentally hidden, because it's so complicated, because you don't know where the tree went this piece of wood came out of. You don't know where the person who made it is not here. The person who is holding this up has to have hands. Where did these hands come from? My mother and my biological father are long gone, but this is here. It might sound a little silly to you, but you might want to look really closely at causes and conditions, all of them. And when you start to look at all of them, you see that you can't see all of them. You can't find the first cause of anything. But the ego mind, the self-centered mind, the controlling mind, the mind that wants control, the mind that wants something bigger, something better, the mind that doesn't want to lose, that mind will settle for what? Praise and blame. Well, who was right? Well, that guy was right. Okay. Well, who was wrong? Well, he's, she's, they're the one. They did it. They're the. And sometimes if we can't find that, then we'll just attribute something because we can't stand to not know. So we'll just, must be black people. I mean, those areas are extremely difficult to trace. And so I say, as much as you can, you've heard me say this over and over again, just receive whatever's showing up in your world. And if it's a little bit threatening, you're probably going to be okay. I'm not saying you're going to feel okay. I didn't say that. You might never feel okay if you listen to what the Buddha said. Life is suffering, and its cause is wanting something else. And the goal is cessation. It doesn't mean the suffering is going to go away. If you thought that's what he meant, yeah. He was, what was he doing? He was seducing you into the path. Go ahead.
Sokuzan, what is the difference between a situational belief and a belief that you're helping us to see more clearly?
Do you believe that I'm helping you to see more clearly? I don't need that much credit. Be more clear about what you're saying. If I'm helping you to see more clearly, you should be able to express your question more clearly.
Sokuzan, what's the difference between a situational belief and a belief of ignorance, based on ignorance?
The belief might be perpetuated or pulled forward because it can cover up fear of the unknown. And you can go into that yourself and probably write a paper on it. That you believe something is true, and the situation, if I reuse your situation without going into your personal history, you tend to see more deeply into certain levels of consciousness than most people. It's not a compliment, just a description. And sometimes what you see there, you have a reaction to. Have you noticed? It's called a belief. But you don't have to believe it or disbelieve it. Just like if you have anything that shows up in the mind stream, you don't have to accept it, reject it, or turn away from it. And then because of dependent origination, this is very important. Because of dependent origination, because you've got your fat butt out of the way, so to speak, by not being so sure of yourself about right and wrong, up and down, back and forth. The very dependent origination that arises there is situational. It's called situational anything. Situational. It's called environmental generosity, according to the Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And it's environmental. It doesn't belong to anyone. Wisdom doesn't belong to anyone. You can't become wise, but you can stop avoiding it by thinking that there's someone who needs to be someone else. Just be genuine. And the way that you, to address your question, I would say the situational event comes about just because it's situational. It's a very simple dependent origination that is pretty obvious. This happens, that happens, and this is true, that's true. The door closed, someone went out. I believe they're probably going to the store because I know this is about the time that somebody needs to go. Little things like that we buy into as being that's probably happening, probability. But the kind that we use to cover up is because we don't know we're doing it, because it actually looks like what? The truth. It just looks like the truth. And that's when I say, don't believe your thoughts, don't believe your feelings, and don't ignore them, because the feelings or the thoughts, which are also conditioned, will arise out of what we call the eighth consciousness, come through the seventh consciousness of the paranoid area of the mind, and be reshaped and whittled down and be fed into the sixth consciousness, and it'll just seem like the truth. You follow me?
Sokuzan, how can we see that belief if it's ignoring?
It just takes time. It just persist. Return to the cushion, sit down, hold still, watch what moves, and do it over and over as you've been doing. You just come out of a 30-day solitary retreat. How was that?
Can I go back in?
No. You need to stay out here and function with the forms and be around this irritating sangha. So. Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned those pesky attorneys. I'm wondering, when we're in a position where we are demanded by law or by circumstance to have beliefs, how do we receive while producing Sanho Bowing?
I actually, Sanho, I know you're studying to be an attorney, and I have no, I know you, I don't read your mind, but I know you well enough that you're not going to have a problem with that. You have a natural, and again, it's not a compliment, but you have a natural sense of the things being appropriate or not so appropriate. So I wouldn't say that I go so far as to say I trust you. I don't trust anything. But I would say that you're going to be fine. Just continue to train your mind. Spend time on the cushion, sit down, hold still, watch what moves. And so, and it's not that you don't need to, swear an oath or pass the bar, as you're going to do at some point. And, but it's about keep just a tacit understanding with that you're going to have to buy into some things because you're in a cultural context, but you don't have to go all the way in where you stop investigating that. The investigation can still happen at the same time you're observing a form. It's just like coming to the altar and bowing to the altar, offering incense. Those forms never stay the same, but we endeavor to use that form over and over and over again so that we can train our mind to see more clearly what is moving and see that what is moving, how we need to interact with whatever the situation that is, situationally. Sometimes it's called just dancing with things. This happens, that happens. Some things we align ourselves with it. Some things we resonate with, but it's not about thinking about it. This doesn't mean that being an attorney and having to deal with passing the bar or something like that couldn't involve a lot of conceptual structuring or fabrication or analysis and so on. But belief and disbelief, you can actually do that without locking down on things, especially if you're training your mind. Then there's a lot more. The thing with mind training is what happens to the individual is what you thought space was, the space around your thoughts, around your emotions, in your dreams. The space is not what you thought it was, is not what it is. Because what it is not separate from the very things that are rising in the space. This is why it's so mind-blowing. But once the mind is blown, then there's no problem. Further questions? Senchu, go ahead.
When we react to something, does that always imply belief?
When we react to something, does it always imply belief, is what Senchu is asking. And I would say not necessarily. The reaction of the causes and conditions that arise for anybody, for me, for you, for your son, or for anybody, is dependently risen. It has nothing to do with with a solid being somewhere that's actually reacting. The reacting is reacting. And the witnessing quality of the mind for some time may be aligned with some kind of identity, and it will be probably for years. But eventually, through the sitting practice of meditation, eventually that kind of wears out. Even Trungpa Rinpoche said, you wear out ego by walking on it like an old shoe. You just don't get it re-healed or sold. So just observe. And actually, you can actually look at its substantiality or its longevity, and see if it's got a vampire quality to it somewhere, where it's trying to suck the blood out of something else. Sorry for the disturbing image, but that's what showed up. So.
Geez, I'm bowing. There's a question in the chat box from Ivan. He asks, how can we distinguish between belief and knowledge? Bowing.
So there's a similarity there, but the knowledge is there's lots of levels, lots of areas, and we could talk about the knowledge of how to fix, repair a bicycle, or there's a kind of knowledge, a structural kind of situation that's happening there. So it just has a strong structure to it, concept. Memory sometimes masquerades as knowledge. Just because somebody can remember everything doesn't mean they know anything about what they just remembered. Sometimes especially in our situation, somebody who's able to remember the structures of the Buddha Dharma in its more complicated forms, different schools of Buddhism. Some people are show up as extremely shiny and brilliant. And that might look like knowledge. It might look like wisdom. So depending on the imputation coming from you not looking at that or reading that or talking to someone who seems to know a lot about that. The belief part of it, to separate it a little bit from the knowing, having an object that you know about, over into the belief. The belief is something you think is true that you don't really know what it is. but you might come out of that belief and fabricate a bunch of things that will reinforce the belief. One of the things that is done in religious practice are forms. Buddhism is not the only one, maybe, but one of the few forms where the actual form you're practicing is empty of your ideas about it. So most spiritual religious practices that are especially theistic, they want you to actually believe what you're doing. And that has its use. When I say it has its use, if you're practicing creation completion practice of say white Tara, which is something some of us do here, fairly straightforward, simple insofar as any of those are simple. You actually believe, or you tell yourself to believe that you are sending energy, or white Tara sending energy out to all beings and healing all of them, and you imagine that happening. So you might want to look at that. If you're doing that, is that belief, or is it, if you know that you're deliberately believing it or you're imagining it, it's not exactly believing. It's more about generating something. But the generation should come out of space and not out of ideas about it. This is why we use an image like this is white Tara up here. This is why we use a deity, because finding our own wisdom mind is difficult. We might need some kind of an image. Go ahead, Junchu.
Bowing. How can we tell the difference between something that's true and something we're believing?
I think it's so situational, and it's so different with each person, the way each person is handling their own mind stream, the difficulty that arises if you're doing anything with the mind stream other than just witnessing it or observing it or feeling it, is the other way of saying it. Just feel what's happening, and you're abandoning that for what caused it, even if it's correct. Even if somebody did walk in the room and say something to you and caused you to have emotions, they're still your emotions. No one poured any feelings into you. But this doesn't mean that if somebody comes up and hits you, that suffering that you're feeling wasn't caused by them. Of course it was, but it's still your nerve endings. That being said, doesn't mean that that person didn't cause that, or the interdependence between situations or show up all kinds of different ways. So as far as believing or disbelieving, or if something is true or not true, that whole area is just extremely complicated. It looks simple, but it's not simple. And so therefore, less is better. Don't believe anything unless you're forced to. In some way, some causes and conditions just force you to you hear something in the other room and it's making a certain sound, and you don't know what it is, but you believe it's a hippopotamus because you have a recording of a hippopotamus. You've listened to it. You've studied hippopotami, and you hear it. I'm being silly, but I'm just saying, we're looking for any evidence and we'll settle. And I would say, don't settle. Don't settle for evidence just because you're having negative feelings and it seems to be triggered by that person or this situation or that. We talked about this earlier. So don't go to true or false. Don't go to any position on it. Have a willingness to not have a reference point on it. There's a very nature, and it's not exactly that, but it's the very nature of wisdom. There's no reference. Go ahead.
It feels like not doing anything with it leaves me open to being vulnerable or getting hurt.
Well, you're wearing a Raksu, you received Jukai, so you've received the vow to be with all things, to save all beings. You might as well start with your own emotions. Train your mind. Train your mind. I'm not saying ignore your feelings, and I'm not saying validate the feelings by finding out what caused it or do anything. Just feel. Just feel. Not comfortable. And it's a practice, so you have to do a lot of it. And that's why we have a monastery. That's why, with help of everybody here, we've created this, because it looks like this is necessary for some people, maybe not thousands but a dozen or so, to come and really dedicate your life to this. Because you can't, meditation, I'm not saying you can't have it as a hobby or something that you meditate once in a while. Go ahead. But in order to go deeply into what this world is before your body-mind complex passes out of it and back into the elements, death comes without warning, it might be a good idea to find out who you are. Because who you are can't die. And don't believe anything I say. You could consider it. You might consider it by saying, how can he possibly know that? I don't know it. It's not knowledge in the conventional sense. It isn't something that I used to not know and now I know. Not that, yes.
Shokubang, what is the feeling of being hurt or harmed by another person?
Misunderstanding. And it's a terrible misunderstanding because this is where the Peloponnesian Wars came from. Somebody did something and I'm going to get back at them. This is where the very dynamics that you sometimes have to deal with in your mind, with feeling intensely put upon by some other situation. One of them is concerned that somebody's going to control you. I don't know if you're still dealing with that or not. Maybe, maybe not. And you don't have to not deal with it anymore. It's not what is arising in the mind stream. Is there someone there? Is there a witness? Is there someone who's endangered? I'm not saying you don't have nerve endings and things don't feel really good and other times really feel bad, of course, because this is a human organism with nerve endings, lots of them.
Shokubang, so in a situation of feeling like we've been put upon, is there a way to
I'm listening.
not just congeal into what's arising?
It's a good question. I think it's a matter, if you're a meditator, which you are, someone who has a strong practice, it's just a matter of don't shut down on it, don't push it away, don't add any agenda onto it, don't necessarily look for any possibility of that going away. Don't accept it, don't reject it, don't look away. It's a simple way of saying it. And how do we do that? Damn, it's just hard to do that. Excuse me, it's difficult to just see that and just do that. But what you can do is you can watch the way you can't quite manipulate or control that. And that at some point in that area, what happens eventually, and it happens even without even trying, it just happens something out of the way consciousness or awareness works when the struggle starts to leak away, is because it's not separate. There's not two, that which is looking at the stuff begins to look and see there isn't anyone doing that. And it's not a conclusion. There's nothing to conclude. You won't necessarily feel like you're some kind of awake person. Well, you're not the sage from Traverse City. That doesn't mean that at some point you couldn't function as someone's teacher. Of course you could. I wouldn't want to be your student.
Sanobag.
Go ahead, Sano.
Is there a difference between setting boundaries about what behavior you will and will not accept from others and ignoring or the other two jewels? Sanobag.
Sano, I think that's completely up to you. That's an area that, you should hear me say over and over again, don't do anything else you have to. But if you have a situation coming up where, well, do I have to do that? Do I have to? So this would allow you to look more deeply into it. And you might say, it might not even be a conclusion based on some kind of fact or some kind of threat or you might just say, I just have to do it this way. I have to line things up and I have to say, this is the boundary I have. So boundaries, natural boundaries are everywhere. Quite often we set up arbitrary boundaries based on fear, based on hope, based on control, based on structure, based on society, based on culture, based on all kinds of control. So I'm not going to step into your mind stream, so to speak, and say you should or you shouldn't. But I would say my recommendation to you is less is better. I wouldn't do too much, but do enough so that that you're not some kind of a person who doesn't need any boundaries, or have another kind of identity where I used to have boundaries, but now I'm boundaryless. So really watch for the identity area for something trying to collect a little bit of a merit badge or something. Like Trungpa Rinpoche gave a seminar back in the 70s called Buddha Dharma Without Credentials. Awaken truth, Buddha, awake, Dharma, truth, awaken truth with no proof. If you're awakened, you won't have to get your imprimatur from anyone. You won't need proof, and you won't even necessarily feel like somebody's here as awake. That may not be the case. You may just not be struggling anymore with anything, or you may struggle, and you may struggle from now on. And then people will say, "Isn't that the teacher that struggles?" Yeah, and loses all the time. Further questions? Are there any questions? It looks like.
Anna Maria Brown.
Okay, Anna Maria, go ahead.
Thank you. You once said the statement, "The sun will come up tomorrow," and then you said, "The sun doesn't need your help." Could the same be said about truth, that truth doesn't need you to believe in it?
Yeah, don't believe in anything, but don't disbelieve. So if you don't believe it, you don't disbelieve it, and you're not shutting it out, you're pretty much lost in space. I'm just saying that you don't really have much of a reference point. And as meditators, as people who are practicing and studying the Mahayana, I sometimes say my only reference point is the vow I received many years ago. A vow to be with all things. It took me a long time to understand what that meant. It does not mean meddling with things. Yuhang says, Yuhang Bowing, how can I use my believe to help my children be curious to discover their belief? I don't know. I don't have a direct response for that, but I think with children, just less is better. Protect them. Don't keep them away from broken glass. Keep them out of the road. Let them understand whether they need more clothing or not, instead of bundling them up based on your ideas. Same thing with food. You know what I'm saying. I don't need to tell you that. But less is better. Protect them. The thing is, the not being safe is what children are dealing with. I know that's certainly what I was dealing with. That's what we've been looking at in that book, the polyvagal theories. They're about basic safety is really important. Something about that can be threatening for people.
Anna Maria Bowing, I have a follow-up question.
Certainly, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
If I see the truth, does the need for belief fall away?
Yeah. But the truth, the way I say it, and just in a couple of relative words, is not separate. You don't see anything else. I mean, I'm not saying you don't see this is over here and I'm over there. You see the separations, but the fundamental understanding is there isn't anything else. So there's no way you can fail. There's no way you can succeed. There's no way you can die. The body mind is going down. Whoop-de-doo. I'm not saying that couldn't be frightening or even painful. But physical pain is, so you still have a body, so it can be extremely painful. But nothing is destroyed. Changing, you could say it changes forms, but I wouldn't get too fancy with that, because your consciousness might go into an area where you don't have no awareness at all for a long time. Yeah, that long. But you won't care particularly. And if you do, then you will. More. Stop looking at me like that. Jeez, I didn't do anything wrong. They're all glaring at me. So should I get upset? I mean, are they causing me to feel a certain way? Yeah. So my American Sign Language monk just went, what does this mean? That means you're to blame? What does that mean?
I was acting like I was in cause pain or causing feelings.
Oh, because it's not American Sign Language?
It might be, but
Oh, okay. See, I misunderstood that. I believed he was using a particular sign and he was just threatening to hit me. It was that simple. Anybody else out there in TV land?
Kevin Bowing,
Kevin, go ahead, please.
when we do a practice like creation completion or loving kindness practice, what are we generating, Bowing?
Yeah, you're generating changing your attitude towards fundamentally supporting others. And it may not feel like it particularly, but it doesn't need to. You're not looking for feedback. You're looking to just give everything your attention, give everything your kindness, give everything, give. You won't get a credential. If you're getting credentials, it's a little bit more merchandising area. There are transactional stuff. Just give. So what are you giving? If you think you're giving kindness, you probably are. If you think you're giving support or help or some kind of consideration, that is the practice part. The practice part is like that. That's when there's still a great division between you and everything else. That's why we practice things like Maitri Bhavana and so on. But the fruition of that, there isn't anyone. There's no one left to do anything with or for anyone else. You're no longer suffering on your own. You're suffering with everything. You could say you're suffering in hell. You're suffering in heaven. You're suffering in all the realms, not separate from anything. That's why the vow to be with the Bodhisattva vow to be with all things is I vow to stay here until samsara is liberated. So don't do that unless you want to do that.
Yuhong Baoing. I have a follow-up question about the question I asked.
Go ahead.
So for me is, I know that fundamentally my kids and I are the same. I need a teacher to see my belief and unbeliefs. And for them, their beliefs and not beliefs are a condition too. So I need a teacher to guide me, and who for me is I'm their mom. I feel like it's my responsibility to at least to guide or sort of have the, I don't know, the way to help.
I'm ready to respond. I think you're doing fine. I wouldn't change anything you're doing. I think you're doing just fine. The most important thing I could say is spend some time, sit down, hold still, and watch the movement of your mind. Just train your mind. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to, I'll always help you. You owe me nothing. You don't need to, you don't need to do anything. All you have to do is ask questions. I'll try to respond in as helpful a way as I can without interfering with you and your children and your family and your culture and your ideas or your hopes and fears without your permission. In other words, that permission might just come as situationally as asking a question. What should I do with, like you asked me a little bit about Abraham the other day. Something was happening with him, and I remember responding. I don't remember exactly what I said, but just responding as best I could. But I'm also saying, I don't know. I mean, I'm not like some kind of expert in that area. I work with the mind and with my mind and with what appears as your mind as you bring it this way through your question. And so if you ask a question, you're temporarily for the next 3 seconds, 3 minutes, 3 days, you're interested in what I have to say about what is happening with you. And so I just do the best I can. But you don't have to believe anything I'm saying. You could consider it. You could listen and say, well, see, Sokuzan said this and this, but then you might say, well, he doesn't really know Abraham very well. If he knew about Abraham doing this or doing some odd kind of thing I don't know about, he wouldn't be saying that. So, I'm saying it's always very situational. Right and wrong are extra. We don't need that. It's a cooperation. So I might have a little more experience than you do. So I'm happy to respond to you be as helpful as I can without interfering with that which you need to see or need to understand yourself, or Abraham needs to see. More? You have more about that? It's a good inquiry.
Bowing. Every time, for example, my 6 years old, every time she says something, I have not really much to say because I always think that, fundamentally we're the same. Me and her, she has her cause and conditions. I have mine. I feel like I have really less to say, which really, it's good to explore. At the same time, I lost a sense of control, even though I still want that as a mom. Bye.
I think you're doing fine. I'm not saying you feel particularly good about it, but just keep going. It's just weather. I mean, psychological, emotional weather for you, weather for others, for your children. It's just things come and go. Whatever shows up, it probably needs to be there because it's dependently arisen. When it goes away, probably needs to go away. So less pushing and pulling and more what? Receive whatever is happening. Give everything you can as possible your attention. And one of the ways you can train your mind to do that is to hold the body very still and watch the continued movement of the mind. So you get to know yourself, your consciousness, your awareness, your thought process on a very deep level. And at some point, and there's no guarantee here, but at some point, the self-centeredness or the identity aspect of consciousness just collapses because it no longer it needs to get nutrition from being agreed with or disagreed with or shut down on or propelled by some kind of thought process. The traditional way of talking about this is a turning around and a revolution at the basis of consciousness, the eighth consciousness in the Yogacara tradition. I don't know if I go that far, something like that. That's one way of talking about it. It's just that there isn't anyone, no separate being. There was another question, I think.
Bye.
Yeah. You want to see if there's one more there? And then
Is on bowing.
Yes.
It's from Sharon. She says, Sharon Bowing, how can we best respond to the beliefs of a loved one in active, long-standing addiction? Bowing.
Yeah. Respect their confusion. Be respectful. Don't step in and without their permission. The addiction here, and you don't have to believe anything I'm saying, and don't believe it. You could consider it, but I don't want you to believe it. You could reflect on this as maybe a little bit different way of looking at it. Stop trying to fix them. No, that addiction is dependently arisen. A long-standing addiction, you might actually help them more by being with them and not doing anything with that. That will show up, because especially if you've been kind of pushing and pulling and giving them ideas, and suddenly you're there all the time and you no longer are. They might even turn around and say, don't you care about me anymore? You're not worried about my addiction? All kinds of things could show up. Dependent origination is very odd. That's why I often say to people, if you have someone who's threatening to end their life, be very, very careful about interfering with that. It's really none of your business. And when they set up these hotlines and everything, I'm not saying it's wrong. Of course, probably a good thing. People need someone to talk to. But it's not quite as helpful as it might look from the surface. Don't believe me. Don't believe what I'm saying. Could think about it a little bit. Unya said that I can take a final question, and I usually do pretty much whatever she tells me to do. Uh-oh, Shoto, well, Shoto, take a lot longer because Shoto's a very convoluted thinker. Go ahead. Everybody's grinning. Yes, go ahead.
You're talking about like ego needing nourishment,
Yes.
and thinking of how Trungpa Rinpoche talks about just don't resoul the ego.
Yeah.
And it seems like some people might practice for decades and not actually investigate the way that they're resouling it and have been
Yeah.
building it up the entire time. So how can we be sure that our practice is not reinforcing that sense of self-centeredness?
Yeah, you can't be sure. You can't be sure. So this is why we have the three jewels: the Buddha, the teaching person. I'm not talking about the historical Buddha, though we can study that also, but a teacher and a teaching, or the teaching, or the Buddha's Dharma, which is we study in all kinds of forms, and a Sangha, which you're in the midst of a community of people who have a strong intention to train their minds. Some of them are fully ordained, as you are. So pretty sincere about this, pretty serious about putting energy into it. That structure, the way the community works and the way the teaching works conceptually and the way the interaction with the teaching person works will help you for that. So it's not that you'll notice that you no longer are resouling your ego. You won't there won't be any progress on the path in that regard.
When you're bowing. Chazan, could you read the question? I saw Andy, I think, post a question maybe about Sokuzan's next book.
Cheers on buying. Ivan asked, when are you publishing your book on addiction? Buying.
Oh, I don't know. Ondo. Several people are working on that, and it should be a pretty good book. And she's worked very hard on it. We've looked around for a publisher. I think we're still looking around a little bit for a publisher. We've got but you asked me when, and I have no idea. Do you have any idea? We don't know. We were turned down by Shambhala, and so I think that I don't have any idea why they would do that. It seemed like it would be a valuable book for them to publish, but I don't know.
We just keep going.
Huh?
We just keep going.
Yeah, we just keep going. If we eventually don't find anybody, we'll just self-publish. We've done it before. That we did it with a meditation primer, so we just can't publish as many and get. The nice thing about having a publisher do that is then they advertise it, so it gets out there ways. Okay. We'll dedicate the merit, which is a good thing to do.
May we bring this country into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiho san chi shifu shi son bu sa moko sa moko ho ja ho mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokokoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them